I'm Ken Dychtwald. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a friend. I'm also a psychologist and a gerontologist and the CEO of a company named AgeWave. I've been a documentary filmmaker and I've written 18 books. I grew up thinking I was going to be a physicist. I wound up tuning in, turning on, dropping out, and moving to Esalen in 1970 and became a psychologist. I did my doctorate on the psychology of the body and wrote my very first book, Body Mind. I sat down to work on it when I was 22. But then I got to working with older adults and became captivated by elders and also aging. And then that led me to a realization that we're in the middle of a global transformation right now, being driven by increasing longevity, declining fertility, and the aging of the post-World War II baby boom generation, so I refer to all that as an age wave. And so I've spent much of the last 40 years of my life helping governments and companies and organizations make sense of how do we meet the needs of older people? How do we redo medicine to deal with the chronic diseases of aging? What's the purpose of being a 70-year-old? And of course, at the end of the day, how can all these generations become more interdependent and appreciative of each other? When many of our great psychologists or therapists or philosophers were conjuring up the purpose of life, it wasn't very long. Throughout 99% of human history, believe it or not, the average life expectancy was under 18. Doesn't mean that everybody died on their 18th birthday. And there were always some 50 and 60 and 80-year-olds, but honestly, not that many. We were largely young people. And so we built our sense of identity around, let's call it the first age of life, the first 30 years, about body formation, initial identity creation. Am I going to be a good person, a bad? What are my values? Will I fall in love? And societies were kind of hunkered down into that first age. And then we began to live a bit longer and demography started shifting. So a second age emerged, 30 to 60. And the purpose of that is, as we know, formation of family, strengthening one's identity, becoming a parent, building a career, caring for one's own parents. And that usually was around when people were dying. But now in this new era, we're living to 80 or 90, or frankly, in the decades to come, maybe 110 or 120. We've got this whole period of life past 60, which is also going to see the most growth of all the different ages around the world. And so there's a new purpose that's sort of emerging. People are beginning to wonder, well, is it time just for a big vacation? And a lot of folks saying, no, that's kind of boring. And some people are thinking it's a time to reinvent yourself, maybe to fall in love again, maybe to go back to school. And there's many of us, and I'm in this camp, who feel that some amount of our time and effort and energy ought to be devoted to giving back, to being an elder, in a sense, to be helping the young people in the communities, to be taking whatever resources you might have gathered and accumulated and seeing to it that you're planting seeds for a better future. So I am one who, after 48 years now in the study of aging, don't think that maturity is a time just for a long vacation. I think it's great to have fun, to play and relax and goof off and watch TV and take wonderful trips. But I think that there's an identity formation that happens as a grown-up. And there's also coping with grief and loss, because you're more likely to have seen your parents die when you're 70 than when you were 20. And also, I think there's a great need in the world for kind of elder wisdom. The purpose of being a 70 or 80-year-old is, first of all, to enjoy the life and have gratitude for the life you've lived, to be a teacher to younger people, to have some fun, and also to be thinking about leaving a legacy. When I reached this stage in my life, I realized you got to take really good care of one's body, because don't want to be sick, don't want to be suffering, don't want to be frail, don't want to be breaking things and falling down. And so, for example, I haven't eaten meat for 35 years, and we eat primarily an organic, anti-inflammatory, plant-based diet, my wife and I. And I work out every day and I've had a yoga practice for 52 years. And so there's the body stuff. And that's sort of like not the most important, but I tell you what, if you're hurting or suffering or you're losing your cognitive functions, the rest of it is not so much fun. So when 65 came around, it's kind of like, oh, now you're supposed to, turn it off. And I thought, wow, I'm like a little smarter now than I used to be, better connected than I used to be. I've got work to do. So I still work, but I've kind of think of it now as sort of a portfolio. So I try to take more time off each year. So rather than having, work like a dog for 40 years and then watch TV for 25 years, my wife and I will take maybe a month and a half off a year. And maybe in the coming years, we'll take a little more time off. Also, I do about half of what I do, I guess the word is pro bono, volunteer. And for me, while I've done volunteering at soup kitchens and things like that, I like to volunteer by helping young professionals or by helping startup companies or by helping organizations. So I try to spend about half of my time, half of my work, doing it in an encore sort of way without having to get paid. When you get to be older yourself, you start to count yourself and your time not only from the beginning, 72 years, but from the end. How many more summers will I have? When I see my children who are 32 and 35, how much into their life will I survive? So I cherish every minute I've got with them. And there are all kinds of creative and important works that I want to do. So rather than saying, heck with that, I'm just like doubling down. And it's partly a sense of urgency. Oddly, in my maturity, I feel more a sense of urgency and intensity than I felt even as a young man. And I was a pretty go-getting young man. A little over 20 years ago, I was asked to provide commentary for CNN when John Glenn announced he was going to be going up into space at 77. Now, I had met Glenn before. We had testified before the Senate once in Washington, and he was a very tough guy. So I thought, wow, this guy's going back up to space. Let me watch his first interviews to see what he has to say so that when I make my commentary, I'm informed. And I watched his first interviews, and there was a lot of young reporters doing things like, don't you think you're a little old for this? And, what if you have to go to the potty and you're going to wear a diaper? And what if your head blows up? Or it was just really insulting stuff. It was all like, you're an old geezer, you ought to be puttering around the house. And Glenn turned to these young reporters and he said, hey, just because I'll be 77 doesn't mean I still don't have dreams. That really because I thought, wow, I think we think in what has historically been a youthful world that you're supposed to have dreams when you're young and then you fulfill them, hooray, or you don't, I'm sorry, and then you're dreamless for the end of your life. And what Glenn was saying was no, that if we're going to live longer lives, we can have new dreams. I have so many dreams that I still want to be and do. I've been married to my wife now for 39 years. And by the way, we get remarried every year, different location, different religion. That was sort of an Esalen kooky thing I decided the night we got married. I'd like to marry her 50 times. I'd like to marry her 70 times. I'd love to see my kids have children. Love to be a grandpa. I've got some friends and relatives who are grandparents, and it just seems like they're goofy out of their minds, with that experience. I want to write a science fiction novel, and I'd like to get it made into a movie. And I'd like for it to be called The Cure. I've even got a potential writing partner on it about a breakthrough with regard to longevity and disease that creates sort of almost like Arthur Clarke's Childhood's End, next level humans. I'd like to learn how to relax a little better, I kind of would have thought by the time I reached this age, for all the personal work I've done on myself, that I'd be a little less insecure. I gave a talk at Esalen the other night, and I was worried, what if nobody comes, and I'm thinking, my God, I've given talks to 2.5 million people. You'd think I'd be over that by now. I'd like to learn to sculpt. You know, I feel like I've got strength and power in my hands, and I don't think I could paint or draw. I'm terrible at that kind of stuff, but I think sculpting might be fascinating. I've never been to India. I'm kind of just getting my engines going. And I know this can sound neurotic and I apologize, but I'd like to have more impact. You know, I'd like to be able to help my own generation be more purposeful and contributory. I'd like to be able to nudge the master narrative so that aging is less about decline and more about contribution. I'd like to have the field of medicine smarten up so that we're all healthier than we are now. I'd like to challenge the tech capitalists because I think they've gotten a little too carried away with the money and not thinking enough about its impact on our nature, our comfort with ourselves. There's so many things I'd love to be and do and play with. I hope I have time to do some of them, especially more weddings with my wife. I'd like to have some of what I've learned about mind, body, aging, life, death, empowerment, communality. I'd love to have some of my life lessons have an impact on my children and maybe the people of the world. You know, that I'd love to have, that my life wasn't just about my own self-indulgent curiosities, but that I could be in some way a useful teacher.